The hacks just keep on coming, whether from China or Russia. Ransomware attacks have crippled critical sectors of the U.S. economy. Just the past 6 months, SolarWinds, Microsoft, Colonial Pipeline, the MTA, the Metropolitan Transit Authority, and JBS have all been victimized. Here's what former Trump Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert had to say at the Yale CEO conference just moments ago about retaliating for the attacks and why that could be dangerous in the short run.
Trump didn't put any pressure whatsoever on Russia. In fact, gave them latitude to act and regroup. The problem here is short-term risk. We're just not collectively ready as U.S. companies and private industry.
All right, let's bring in David Kennedy, former NSA and Marine Corps hacker and the CEO of TrustedSec. David, welcome. We're glad to have you with us. Why are all these attacks seemingly happening now? What ties them together?
Well, what's interesting is these hacks have been happening for a long time. Ransomware, nation state attacks. But the problem is that they started going after what we call critical infrastructure. So we saw with the Colonial Pipeline, obviously the gas shortages, lately with JBS, with the meat shortages. They're getting more brazen in their attacks, and the sophistication levels of these groups are increasing, which allows them to target much larger targets. And they're getting paid ransom. They have the sanctions of Russia to allow them to operate freely. It's really getting out of control at this point, and a lot of companies are being impacted by it.
The MTA, the Metropolitan Transit Authority in New York, apparently was hacked by a Chinese originator, but a lot of them have been Russian. Is Putin of any mind to clamp down on these things, and how do you see the dynamic playing out when the president meets with Putin in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, there definitely needs to be a strong tonality and policy shift about how we address Russia specifically. What's happened before is that the cyber warfare realm has been loosely defined, right? Nation state attacks where it's coming from direct countries that are sanctioned through the countries like Russia, like China, like the United States, for example, are accepted as far as intelligence gathering purposes, hacking into corporations and companies. But these ransomware groups have been treated independently different than what the country does. So, for example, all these different ransomware groups, the top 5 ransomware groups that yield hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that operate in Russia with impunity in Russia have not been treated the same as on behalf of the Russian government. So it's basically like, hey, you can go ahead and hack any U.S.-based company. It's good for the Russian economy. It's good for the Kremlin. It's good for making pain within the United States and its allies. And, we're not going to treat it the same here from a foreign policy perspective, which really needs to shift. These are big issues that I hope that President Biden tackles with Putin. To say, listen, if you're attacking U.S.-based companies and these ransomware groups are in your house and you're not touching them, you're going to be held liable for it. That has to change.
David, a lot of people seem to think the best offense is a good defense in this case, and saying to U.S. companies, well, just shore up your cyber protections. And we've even had guests suggest banning crypto because crypto is typically the way that ransoms are paid. Do either of those make sense to you as a strong defense?
Listen, we have to get better at defense. 85% of the critical infrastructure that we have in here in the United States is private sector, and a large percentage of them are grossly inadequate to handle the types of security threats that we see. So cybersecurity definitely has to get better defensively. Second, if you disallow the payments of cryptocurrency, you're not going to be able to ban cryptocurrency, but if you disallow and make it illegal for payments to these ransomware groups, that's the government coming into private sector very heavily and saying, listen, you're going to be completely shut down without the ability to recover. And I've dealt with a lot of these cases personally. I've dealt with DarkSide. I've dealt with Revel, the most recent attack with on the meat processing company. And it cripples these companies. They have no ability to recover. They're completely out of business unless they pay these ransoms. So it's a very difficult, delicate balance to deal with. And yes, these companies have to do more with cybersecurity. But at the same time, if we disallow and completely shut off the payment process for these, you're going to have companies go out of business here in the United States.
Exactly.
So I agree with that, but it's a very delicate balance.
But what you're basically saying is that there's no way for the U.S. government to help these companies play defense. Therefore, but the U.S. government doesn't appear to want to play offense. I mean, you can't even do a like for like. Can you imagine if the U.S. just said to our hackers, well, you know what? All right, just go after their pipelines and we'll look the other way. I mean, there would be outrage. Right. If we can't really defend properly, because that's just not what the government can do that well in terms of the rapid response. If we can't really go on the attack in the traditional like for like way, then what do we do?
Yeah, you see the defensive side of the house where they help more after the fact, right? So after a breach occurs, after they've been ransomed, they They help the companies, identify who the actors were, but they're not facilitating ransom. They say don't pay the ransom, but a lot of times you have to. So defensively, there's not much we can do from the government perspective inward to private organizations. And on the cyber front, we're still shoring up a lot of our offensive capabilities. Traditionally, the National Security Agency has been the major offensive wing and has been used for more intelligence gathering purposes, not really conducting major offensive, type attacks. And then we have Cyber Command from a military kinetic extension perspective, cyber warfare. So, we're building up our abilities here, but we have a number of other options. The sanction routes, we can cause some major infliction of damages on the Russian economy by taking a different type of a stance. So it's not just the cyber side, although we need to be very, very much more aggressive on that, but it's also policy-wise as well.
I guess what I hear you say is we have to do two things: increase our defensive capability and yes, also up the pain that complicit governments may feel
100%
for their role in this. Let me ask you this very quickly. Is this a case in any stretch of the imagination of Russia directly or indirectly testing Joe Biden?
Yeah, it's very peculiar that we're seeing these large profile breaches, especially around our critical infrastructure, right around the time of a new administration. These ransomware groups, were predominantly targeting smaller to medium-sized businesses and never touching critical infrastructure. Now we're seeing this massive attack on our critical infrastructure, which is very peculiar. There's no intelligence that has come out publicly or information that's come out publicly saying that Putin's involved in it, but it's very peculiar at this point in time. And
and as you are implying here, these attacks are qualitatively different because they sow a kind of fear in the American population. They're going after our food supply. They're going after our fuel supply. They're going after our transportation infrastructure. This is a destabilizing matter of a whole different sort than if it was going after other kinds of companies. David Kennedy, we have to leave it there. Alas, I know we'll be seeing more of you. Thank you.